Hi, I'm Campbell. Here working on a chimney, working on the flashing and shingles going around it. The client has a leak. What we're gonna do is take up 2 feet of shingles all the way around this chimney. As you can clearly see, water is ponding on the back side, and water is also ponding on the side of the chimney here. Client wants us to come in and put rubber down, a single-ply membrane. We will fully adhere it, basically glue it to the roof deck and then also up onto the chimney. And what that rubber will do is basically be a seamless sheet all the way across here. It'll go up into the valley a couple feet, and it also come across past the chimney maybe a foot or two. And like I said on that EPDM is really gonna work well for this area. It does have a little bit of taper, but with the shingles like they are now, the way they ran them, how they ran the shingles all the way to it, and now water's just ponding in there. So that EPDM will work with the existing cricket and get that water right on out of there. So like I said, we'll run rubber up the roof, up the chimney. We're gonna remove all this counter, all these shingles, and when we go back, we'll put new counter flashing on that's gonna come up a little bit higher and basically put in new shingles to fill in around the EPDM. Should fix them up good. What we're doing now is finding out where we wanna start. So what I did is I measured off the chimney 2 foot up the roof. And that's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of shingles. So what we're gonna do is we lift up the 6th shingle to expose the nails that are directly under the shingle we want to take out. And that'll allow us to pull this row as needed and let us tear off all the rest. You always want to do this carefully. Really take your time pulling these nails because we're not replacing the shingles we're taking the nails out of. Really, really, really be careful. There's one more nail in here somewhere. Right there. And if you want to look at this, whoever did this roof has nails directly next to the keyways right here. I mean, the nails are just right there. OC says, you know, you can be within 2 inches. This is barely an inch. That nail right there, terrible. And see, when I pull it, this nail will probably be rusty. Yep. The rust on there, just too close to the keyway. It's so much water just going right over top of this nail consistently all the time. That's where all the water just comes on down that keyway, and then you got a nail right there. It just doesn't work. That nail is gonna corrode and rust, and eventually it's gonna corrode and rust so much it's gonna develop a hole. That whole nail is just gonna deteriorate, and eventually water is just gonna start coming on through it. Every time it rains, it fills up that hole, and water just sits there, and just over time, you're gonna have a leak. That's why we don't nail in keyways. Anything below this shingle, we're replacing, so we can just rip these right on up. You can use your flat bar to pull it, and basically just take the whole shingle up and chuck it. But these, you want to be super careful with because we're not replacing this run. And what I noticed was this shingle was nailed high, so it looks like it's delaminating. You can see it pulling apart. These castles are pulling away, the nail strips pulling away. You can see it delaminating right here. See, this is the hardest part right here, is the tying in the valley. What they did is the roof that you want to start with is a roof with less area or less of a pitch, because more water is going to come off this main roof than it will this smaller roof. So what you want to make sure you do is you want to run this smaller roof onto the larger main roof, because most of the water is going to be coming this way. Now if you pictured it the reverse way, if you flip these roofs, too much water is going to be coming and going into the valley. So that's how you know where to start your roof. Pitch plays a factor in that. The amount of roof square plays a factor in that. I'm willing to bet you that the leak is going to be right here at the end of the valley, because either that back pan got a hole in it or it corroded or rusted, or there's a seam between the two back pans at this corner. And a lot of times if you don't do that seam correctly where the two pieces of flashing meet, that's going to be your problem area. That's where the leak's going to be at. So once we get all this, get the back pan off, we're going to get the shingles off. We'll assess what happened. I'm always curious to know what was causing this leak. So what he's saying now is there is a cricket. We talked about it earlier on in the video, but whoever did this roof before just used fairing strips to create a plane on the back of the chimney to force water that way and to force water this way. And since we're going back with rubber, we'll most likely have to put OSB on top of that to create a smooth surface. Because the last thing you want to do is to put rubber over top of a fairing strip, because it would just look terrible and probably leak eventually. So we'll see what it looks like once he gets that off. In these valleys, this roof right here will turn up onto this main roof. We had talked about which side to run first, but when you run this shingle up onto the other side, when you do that, of course, you're gonna put your knee in the valley to hold the shingle down tight inside the valley. One nail would be all you need to do this, to hold this shingle in place. But a lot of guys get in here and do 1, 2, 3 nails. And if someone needs to come behind them to adjust or repair, service this, you're gonna run into all 3 of these nails, and it's gonna make it super difficult to repair this area. That's why you should only do 1 nail on the other side of the valleys. So what we're doing right now, we have the reinforced piece of EPDM, the rubber. It's 0.45 thickness, and like I said, it's reinforced. The reason we went with reinforced is because it is behind the chimney. It's gonna see action, sticks, leaves, there's gonna be some buildup. Right now, we have the sheet laid down. We have 2 feet going up all the way around each side. And what he's gonna do now is he is going to glue the brick itself first. You always wanna glue the surface other than the rubber first because it takes longer to dry. The rubber will always dry the fastest, so keep that in mind. So he's gonna glue this full side up, and we're gonna push that rubber up against the chimney. That'll bond the two together, and then we'll take our neoprene rollers and roll that out, get a really good tight bond there. We'll let that sit, cure up, tack up, and we'll lift up the other sides and do the exact same process. We'll glue the substrate first, the plyboard, because it takes longer to dry, and then we'll glue the rubber. And then once it's tacky to the touch, you know that it's ready to bond the 2 surfaces together. And once this bonding adhesive dries and cures like it should, near impossible to pull it back off, whatever it's bonded to. The key element here is letting the glue dry. The glue has a solvent in it, kind of like paint. When paint dries, the solvent evaporates, and it leaves you with a cured paint job. The same thing goes with rubber. If we were to put this rubber down, glue both sides, and we were to stick the 2 together while it was still wet, that's when you get bubbles, you'll get wrinkles, and so that solvent has nowhere to evaporate to, and that's why you get bubbles. Always let your glue dry. When it's cold, it could take up to 20 minutes for this to dry, but it's worth the wait. All right, so both sides of the glue have dried. The chimney side's dry, the rubber side's dry. What we do is we basically roll the sheet up the chimney. You never want to hold the sheet out and hold it and push it against the chimney. You want to roll it up the chimney a little bit at a time. And before we leave this area, we want to take a neoprene roller and just go down the whole side of the chimney. And basically that just makes it adhere to your surface a lot better than it would by using your hand. I mean, you can see after I roll over it, it takes away any kind of imperfection and really bonds it to wherever, you know, whatever you're going to. what we'll do after is cut a line into this mortar joint here and make a piece of counter flashing that'll come down and cover most of this EPDM, this rubber. And basically this corner right here, after all this is said and done, we'll use a piece of uncured flashing tape and basically, tape flash all this corner really good, and then shingles will come down and cover all this. But super important, all walls have to be rolled. And when it comes down to roof decking, you can use a push broom, or they make larger rollers, 10-inch, 8-inch, 6-inch, and just roll out whatever you glue. We let it dry really good. As you can see, there's no bubbles, no wrinkles in it. So yeah, let your glue dry. Before we do any flashings, any seam tape, any cover tape, what we'll want to do is use weathered membrane cleaner. And what that's going to do, if you have any extra primer or glue that's on top of the rubber where you need to put your flashing, you need to douse a rag with membrane cleaner and just scrub out those areas until your rubber turns black. Right here is talcum powder. All rubber comes with talcum powder, so you can fold it and mend it and move it as needed. But before you do any kind of flashings, definitely get rid of the talcum powder. If the job sits overnight and you get dew on rubber, you have to clean it off as well because it's contaminated. So before any kind of flashing, make sure you clean the area that your flashing is going to with weathered membrane cleaner. When it comes down to cover tape, most of the time we use 6-inch cover tape. Now there's two kinds. This one right here is the uncured cover tape. And by uncured, what that means is that when I pull the tape off the back and I need to flash a corner, or I need to mend it or bend it, I can take this tape and stretch it and make it form to wherever I need to flash. Now like I said, this is uncured cover tape, and the other kind is cured cover tape. It looks about the same. The cured cover tape is smooth, it doesn't have texture like this, and there's no stretching it. Now the only time that we'll use cured cover tape is on the perimeter, which would be gravel stop, drip edge, or any kind of straight runs on a roof. Maybe you're doing a seam, maybe you need to cover tape a whole seam. It's fine to do that. What you don't want to use is uncured cover tape on that. Uncured cover tape, it's made to move, it's made for flashings, it's made to bend. So definitely want to keep uncured and cured on your jobs as needed. Primer is just getting it ready. That way the cover tape would here. So we'll scrub this in real good. You can use a 4-inch chip brush if you scrub it in real good. But if you're doing if you're repairing an older roof, an older EPDM roof, you can take like emery cloth or Brillo pad, something aggressive, and you can start by cleaning it with membrane cleaner to get down to the good surface. And then when you go to apply primer, you can also apply the primer with the emery cloth or the scrub pad, and that just gets it in really good, gets it deep into the membrane. That way when you go to put on your cover tape, it adheres properly. With your any kind of cover tape, seam tape, any kind of tape, or the membrane itself, you always want to round every single one of your corners. Like I said, it doesn't matter if it's cured, uncured, or if it's the EPDM, any kind of single-ply membrane, always round your corners. Square corners basically kind of hold water. It doesn't divert it as well as a rounded corner. And also another thing with cutting EPDM or cutting cover tape, you have to put lap caulk on your cut and 3 inches past your cut on any roof you do, whether it be the EPDM, TPO, PVC. I like to put a crease into the cover tape itself. This kind of just starts the process to make it easy. I'm not going to pull the plastic yet. But basically, I'm just going to kind of dry fit it right there just to see how it does. You always want to have a minimum 1.5 inches touching the EPDM. And if I were to put a piece over this piece of cover tape, it needs to cover 1.5 inches of this. Any kind of membrane, it's 1.5 inches to a 2-inch lap on anything you can think of. Basically, what you're trying to do is match the thickness of EPDM. A single piece of uncured cover tape equals up to half the thickness of EPDM. But if I do 2 pieces that go over one another, it'll equal up the thickness and the strength of the EPDM itself. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and pull this piece. This is gonna release it, and it's ready to be stuck into there. You know, keep your hands on the edges of it. You never wanna put your fingers on the tape itself. If you do that, you might just want to start over if you do, because it's contaminated. So I'm just going to line it up where I had it. Put a little tiny bend in it just to start the process. Kind of eyeball it. Go ahead and lay that on down. Just like that. Just going to take your fingers, really push these corners in really well. So we'll get on each side of it. Remember how I was telling you how it stretches? You're gonna take your hand, get the corners down, just like so. You see this open pocket here? Let's see if I can move a little bit. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my finger, start at the back side, and basically bridge that gap. And this tape is gonna mend to fit this corner. Slowly but surely. Just like that. And there you go. Really, really want to push the corners in super good. If the roof is going to leak, it's going to leak here. So this is the most important spot to make sure you do your flashing correctly. So now that I got one side done, you see this little flap here? We'll push that down. Take your finger. Start with the inside. And just keep pressing it in until that thing sits right. Just like that. Push this side up. By the time you get done, it's watertight. And I'll have one more piece that comes across here that will lap 1.5 inches to cover this void. Yeah, we're gonna do a second piece above this one. So I'm gonna start by priming this whole area. Scrubbing it in real well. I've already taken my rag and cleaned the area. Really prime it good. Of course, let that dry. Doesn't take too long. And you can either use, there's 2 ways to do this, but either which way you have to use uncured cover tape. You can take another piece of rubber, the reinforced 045 rubber, and you can cut it to go around, cut a piece that looks like an L, but you have to run seam tape on the rubber first, and you would use less cover tape. I like to use cover tape. I trust it. I haven't had a problem with it. But everybody's a little different. So, you know, you can glue rubber to this and then strip it in with the cover tape, or you can just cover tape the whole thing as long as you're doubling it up to equal the thickness of the rubber. Like I said, I like cover tape. It costs a little more, but it's super simple to apply. You save a lot of time. So next on the list is a reglet cut and counter flashing. I'm gonna start by cutting this back pan. What we usually do is take a string line from this corner over to that corner, wherever you want your flashing to be at. Pop a line, and of course hold your grinder, that way it expels the dust the opposite way. I've seen guys use it and blowing right back on. Don't do that. If you're on a shingle roof and you're doing these reglet cuts, you want to do your reglet cut before you install the shingles, especially if it's wet or you know it's going to rain. It's really hard to get out brick and mortar dust from a shingle roof. So definitely keep in mind that if you can do that reglet cut before you put those shingles down, I would definitely highly recommend you do that. But for right now, we're gonna pop a line, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut out this mortar joint right here. And then we have this piece of counter flashing right here. It's got a 1/2-inch bend. This 1/2-inch bend is gonna go inside of that cut and sit in the mortar joint. And the rest of this will cover the majority of the EPDM rubber roof. And we always put a hem on our metal, and what that does, it just makes it to where you don't have a sharp edge. It won't cut into the rubber itself. So I'm gonna go ahead and make this cut and blow the dust away, and then we'll install that piece. From what I know, a reglet cut was started back in the day to where they take a diamond blade or sometimes even a chisel. I mean, you can even use your hatchet. You know, in worst case scenario, you can just chisel that out. But what they used to do is put in the piece of counter flashing, and they would take small strips of lead, nice soft lead, and they'd stick it inside of that joint and have a little bit hanging out. And they'd take a hammer and hit the piece of lead, and the piece of lead would actually expand inside of the mortar joint from the pressure you're putting on it. And it would not only seal that, but it would also hold that piece of flashing. If you just take a piece of metal like they did and lay it against this brick and seam seal it, caulk it, what'll happen is this brick actually wicks water. So it absorbs a decent amount of water, but it expels it. And what'll happen is it'll kind of sink into these small porous surfaces, and it basically just acts like there's nothing there. That's what we saw on that piece that we took off the back pan. So what that reglet does is you're going about a 1/2, 3/4, even you could go in 1 inch if you choose. But what that does is it just prevents it from going past there. So the deeper we go in, the longer it'll last, and it's naturally watertight. Water comes down, it hits that ledge, it rolls right off. Even after the caulk goes, it'll most likely still be watertight. So what we're doing now is tying the shingles back into the existing. We're gonna leave approximately 6 to 8 inches of rubber exposed between the new shingles and the EPD and the chimney. What that's gonna allow us to do is keep water treading on away from here. There's a lot of debris, trash, leaves, sticks that might accumulate in this area. And just keeping that water treading through this area freely is gonna help get the trash off the roof. We're also gonna leave a little bit of a gap between the shingle and the corner of the chimney, about a 1/2, maybe 3/4 of an inch. And that's just gonna help get trash, keep it moving through there. Because if we get it real tight and close, you know, granules, trash, and debris can build up in that corner and eventually dam up, which is definitely not be good for the roof. But yeah, we're gonna tie all these shingles in. Make sure we're taking care of the existing roof. If we damage any shingles during that process, we'll have to change them out as we go. The next step in finishing up this chimney is going to be making the counter flashing. This counter flashing is going to have a 1/2 inch bend for a reglet cut. It's going to come down the chimney wall, and it's going to have a 1/2 inch hem facing the inside. So what you're going to want to do, put the piece of metal in the brake, lower it down. Always get your measurements as well before you leave the roof. It's going to be 1/2 inch, 9 inch, and then another 1/2 inch. So you're going to come in here, hold your tape, mark your 1/2 inch. A 1/2 inch plus 9 is going to be 9.5, and then another 1/2 inch will equal up to 10 inches. So you have your marks there, 1/2, 9 1/2. Rotate your piece, and just so you know, I'm marking it on the brown side because my bends are facing that way. So when it's all said and done, the back side, the black side, will be facing out. That's what we want. We want black side out. So 1/2 inch, 9.5, because the face is 9, so 9 plus 1/2 inch. And then another 1/2 inch for your hem. All right. What you're gonna do, open your brake, go all the way in to your last mark. That's your cutoff mark. Just barely expose each end. The cut's gonna be right there on it. Lock it down. Take a blade, fresh blade, old blade, anything will work fine. Barely score across that. Put a little bit of pressure behind it. Get a nice cut there. Just go a little bit at a time. Don't slam the brake up, because what you'll do, if you slam that brake up, you're actually curving the metal over, and it creates a rounded, sharp edge. But if you just take your time and bend a little bit, you know, it's going to give you a nice edge that's not going to hurt you when you're handling it. The next step is going to be the 1/2 inch reglet cut. We'll go ahead and go back to it right there. Make sure your marks are exposed just barely. And you're going to go up about 45 degrees. I'd rather have it underbent than overbent. And the reason for that is when that piece of metal goes in the wall, this right here will be facing upward. So naturally when it rains, even when the caulk disintegrates years down the road, it'll hit and run down the face. But if you go too much, when it rains, you're gonna make a ledge, and that ledge is gonna funnel it into the brick. All right, so we got the reglet cut made. Now we need to do the hem for the bottom, just to stiffen it up, make it look good. It's a good habit just to put a hem in anything you do. Go to your marks, a little bit exposed. You're gonna go all the way with this, or until you start seeing distortion in the metal. All right, so that's all the way bent. All right, give it a little tap. So we got it bent that far, but we need to get it shut. Close your brake, not all the way, because this gets in the way. Just keep it about right there. Take your piece of metal, slide it down to these metal pieces. There's a pin going through there. You're barely gonna touch those. Pull up on your handle, and sliding forward is fine too. You can either have it there or right there, either one's fine. And let this rubber, this gasket right here, compress that. Then you'll get that hem shut and tight. Counter flashing. This one has 11.5 inch face. Make sure to write down all of this. You know, even take a sample piece of metal. You know, take a piece of metal, just put a slight bend in it, and say you need to make a piece of end wall. Go up there and put that piece of metal against the wall to see if it fits. Test fit it. If it works, great. If not, adjust it as needed. And then you could come down here, bend your piece of metal to the same angle, and you know that this piece is going to fit that chimney, that skylight, that end wall perfectly. So same thing again with this, is we're going to do a 1/2 inch reglet bend. Then we have 11.5 on the face of this. It's pretty big. We're covering up all the old holes and cuts and caulk. 12 inches and then a 1/2 inch. And again, we're marking it on the brown side because we're bending the brown side in to where you don't see it. Same thing again. Hook onto it, mark your 1/2. Make sure always mark it on the edge too. It just helps, makes it easier trying to line it up. And then 11.5, so that makes it 12. And then a 1/2 inch hem. Now sometimes if you have a really big piece of flashing and the cut is above 14 inches. My brake right here, this brake is 14 inches depth. That's how much metal you can push until it stops. So if you have a piece and you know that it's bigger than 14 inches, put this piece in the opposite way, that way you know it fits. a standard roll of trim coil is 24 inches, so you can figure your numbers off that to know whether it'll work or not. So cut your piece, score it. Doesn't have to be too much. Little bend, push it down, little bend. Yeah, nice crisp edge. Not gonna hurt you. Same thing, do a reglet bend at 1/2 inch going into the chimney where we cut it. You can do 3/4, you can do 1 inch, whatever works best for you. If you have a rock chimney and it keeps going in and out, and you find that the longest point might be 3/4 of an inch, go ahead and grind into that rock chimney or faux rock chimney past that 3/4. So you want to go 1 inch. So you would make that reglet bend maybe inch and 1/4, and that'll bypass that low spot where the rock is. That depth will catch it. Even if you catch it a little bit, it's better than being shallow, being short. All right, kind of underbend it just a touch. Just like that, you know, just barely have it to where if water hits it, it's going to come down the face and not into the chimney. Naturally watertight. We're going to line up for our 1/2 inch hem. This piece is, the face of it's pretty big, so we're going to hit up here. And it might distort it just a taste, so you kind of got to watch what you're doing. See how it's curled now? It should be alright. Yeah. So that's not bad at all. But if it's really big and you go to bend it and it distorts, maybe back off next time. Same thing again, close the brake, not all the way. That way the metal sits nice and even with the brake. Use your gasket, lift up. This piece pivots up and down. That's why there's a rod in there and enough slack to go in and out. When you lift up, you're making the jaw wider basically. And that way you can come up and over. Because if you try to do it and just hold it right there, it can slide up on you when you do it. So, you know, watch out for things like that, because then you'd be tearing up your face. So we have our long piece of counter. We have the side piece of counter on. I'm gonna go ahead and do this. He's working the shingles in the valley, so I'm just gonna go ahead and pop this in real quick. Always start at one point. I just leave mine long, just work it kind of up and down into that joint. Just take your time, figure out where it's hitting or not hitting. Boom. Just like that. What we'll do is, because there's rubber behind this, rubber requires that it be pinned off every 1 foot, just so it stays in place. So I'll come across this about every foot with mason nails, and then cut my corners, fold around about 3/4 of an inch, maybe a full inch, and then of course run a smooth bead of black caulk across this, and then put some beads over top of the nails when you're done. When you caulk the nail heads, just a little dab over top, and it should look like a button by the time you're done. Lick the finger and just pat it out to a button. I see these guys taking a caulk gun and just globbing it on and just wiping it off. But it just looks good, a little something extra. If you're using mason nails and it's not hitting anything, and you don't want to have a bunch of holes in it, pull out your 16, your 8-penny. Really pull out whatever you got that's gonna work to get that thing fastened against it. It's gonna get covered. There's not gonna be a galvanic reaction. You know, unless you're doing copper, then you gotta watch that. You can use stainless steel, brass, or copper nails. Copper, but just use what you got. Right now I'm running the 16 into this because the regular 1.25" mason nail wasn't enough. What you're gonna do, you're not gonna run it all the way in though. Just barely have it tucked against it. You don't want it all puckered up. Like right now, that's a little bit much, but I think it'll be just fine. But on the next ones, I won't go as hard. This one just wanted to act funny, so had to go on into it. The back piece of counter flashing, usually I would just dry fit it and mark both sides. If I have this side done and that side done, I'll hold my piece up and just put a pencil mark behind it. I'll take the width of a square. For right now, I'm gonna hold it up there, mark it. That's where the mark would be. You'll take your square again, go next to it. That way you have a quick 3/4 of an inch. You have your bend mark here, that basically is the back side of this flashing. And then you have your 3/4 cut mark, which will get folded around. But like I said, you really want to do this before you put a couple nails in it. It's always best to hold your piece up there, mark it, cut it, bend it, and then install everything all at once. I didn't do it that way this time, but 99% of the time, I'll mark it and cut it before it goes up. Right now, I'm gonna take my snips, go to that mark. Always do a little pressure relief cut. So if you try to go in and cut something and make this turn right here without relieving this bend, so if I go in there and just cut, you know, look how sloppy that cut will be. This flange is turned up. It's dimpled right there at the bend. So what I'll do is go in, snip it here at the cut mark, snip it next to it, and fold it up. And then when I take my snips, there's no pressure anymore. So I can just gingerly come down this bend, this piece of metal with my snips. And you know, you're gonna have a clean cut. You're not gonna have to worry about the metal being distorted. And I have to cut this at an angle because it's going downhill. So what you can do now is, if you have them, great. Take your tongs out. Go right to your bend, right to the bend mark. The mark that's, you know, on my side here, but if you dry fit it, it'll be on the back side. And just bend just a tiny bit at a time. Don't want to bend it all at once. You should have about 2 to 3 passes of bending before the bend would be complete. So that's one course of bending. I'm gonna come in here, go to the mark again, bend a little bit more, come up a little bit, bend a little more, same thing up here. So right there, it took me 2 passes, but not done yet. It's still open. It's not flush against this other piece of counter flashing on the side of this chimney. I'm gonna take my fingers and I'm gonna grip the corner of this. And I'm gonna take it as close to the corner as possible, and I'm gonna squeeze in. And what that's gonna do, it's gonna tighten up that bend, and it's gonna have it flush against the side of this piece of counter. Adjust as needed. Come over here, take a look, see if you have any gaps in it. It's very uniform. You have a nice 3/4 inches coming around. It's gonna be watertight. And what you're looking at is that there's no gap between these 2 pieces of counter flashing. It looks good from the ground, it's watertight, and it's super easy to do. Just, you know, carry your square around, dry fit all your pieces, mark the back of them, mark your 3/4, you know, hold your square up on the metal, and that's gonna give you a perfect flange every time. And 3/4 of an inch is plenty enough to turn around. Next part's gonna be caulking, probably the most important part. Start at a point to where you're comfortable. You know, whether you're comfortable starting up here, starting down here and coming back. I'll probably start right here. One thing you gotta look at is they are gonna have this brick changed out at some point and a little bit of repointing done around here. I'm still gonna caulk all this for now just to keep it watertight, but eventually when they come back, you know, it is gonna disrupt our caulk. Our caulk will probably come off and we'll have to come back for it. But, you know, start your bead, face the nozzle towards where you want the caulk to go, because you want to fill in the reglet. You don't want to just caulk onto the ledge. You want this cut right here to face the inside, the crevice between the brick and the reglet metal. So go right over in there. Keep it facing that way. Fill in voids as needed as you come across. If you need to go heavier in some spots, so be it. Take your time. All the way across and down. And this is a huge part, is tooling the caulk. I don't like licking my finger and smoothing caulk out. Some guys like it, it's fine if you want to do that. I prefer to just get my finger right on in there and really push it into the brick. Kind of go back and forth, rubbing it into the brick, pushing into the voids. It takes a minute to do this, but I mean, it really gets it in. Gets it in all those crevices. Gets it in the mortars, the brick. Looks pretty good too. You're gonna want to go around, and then on the nail heads, just face your angle towards it. Barely cover the tip of the nail, the head. Kind of round it off. That's the part where I kind of make a button on it. Smooth the bead out. And it looks better than just dabbing on a little caulk and letting it smudge and smear. Check to make sure there's no other voids you're missing. So far, so good.